Okay, so I got a great question from Diona about the Camper Cafe project that she was doing in the CodePen for the responsive web design certification. Her question was if she really needed to do this repetition of the class item in each of these menu items we see on the code on the website here, if she really needed to do this repetition of the class item for every item. And that is a great question because as coders, we always want to be thinking about, could I be doing this in a smarter, faster, or better way? You don't want to be too smart and optimize too early and make it difficult to understand your code. But you definitely don't want to make something that's difficult to read because your code is just repeating itself so much. So as coders, we always have this sort of balance between optimizing too much, making our code difficult to change or read, or optimizing too little and making our code hard to read as well, but also slow and sometimes hard to change as well. And yes, we can definitely remove the item class in each of these articles, and I'm going to show you how in just a moment. And then afterwards, I'll also show you how to remove the price class in this paragraph as well. And after that, I'll discuss a bit with you. Well, I guess it's a one-sided discussion, but who doesn't love that? If we should be doing this and cases where we absolutely shouldn't do this kind of optimization, removing these classes, and we're going to see a good use of the class attribute. If we search for the item class in our CSS here, let's go ahead and search for that. We can see here there's only one use of the item class where we are actually targeting the p child, the paragraph child, inside the parent of the article element. So let's see if we can remove or change that. If I look around in my HTML document, I can also see that the article element is only being used for this scenario where it is for the menu items here. It's not being used anywhere else. So that means I could safely exchange the class with the class selector item with the article element selector instead. So that would look something like this. And as you can see, the Camper Cafe website still looks the same. Now let's try and remove this class item attribute for each of these HTML items and see if it still works, if I did really make it work without this class item class. So since CodePen doesn't have a search and replace feature, I just don't want to select every class item and remove it manually. That takes a long time and I don't think you should do it either. I'm just going to copy all of the HTML code and paste it into my Visual Studio Code. Now you could also use something like Sublime or even just a regular text editor that has the search and replace functionality. And don't worry if you don't know this sort of editor already. You can always search for Visual Studio Code, download it, and then later on I'm going to be showing you how to use it for coding also. But for now, let's just go ahead and use the search and replace function inside of Visual Studio Code. And you can see I already cheated a bit here and searched for something. And in this case, let's search for class item. So I have a little space in front and then I'm just going to replace it with absolutely nothing. So now they are all removed in all the articles. There's no more class item showing here. Let's go back to the CodePen and I'll just paste in the code again. So now you can see I do not have any item class in my code at all. There's nothing with item in either our CSS or in HTML. So that cleaned up our code a little bit. So that was a great question, Deona. And now we have a little easier to read HTML going on here because we don't have this repetition of the same thing again and again. But what's important here is that we can more easily differentiate and see the content, which is the one that is actually changing here. So let's try and see if we can remove the flavor class now. and maybe even down here the dessert class as well. Again, these are repeated throughout the items, so maybe there's a smarter way to do this, and I would argue that you can. What I would suggest you do now is you try and come up with a solution on how to remove the flavor and the dessert class from the HTML, just like I did now with the item class. So I'll suggest that you try and pause the video now and try and see if you can do it yourself. Okay, so did you pause the video and try it ahead? Now, if you couldn't find a solution, it's okay. It's fine. At least you kind of got your head working a little bit, trying to figure out if you could find a solution. Let's see what the flavor class and the dessert class actually has. So they have a text align left to align them to the left side, and they set the width to 75%. So what if we go into article P, the one that selects all the P elements in article, and we just paste that in here. And then we also remove the flavor and dessert CSS here. So you can see it actually still works in the layout. I haven't broken anything, and just to prove it, I can also take this off right now, and we can see that it kind of ruins everything here. What's going on here, and the reason it ruins it is because we had the width not set to 75% here. But there is one caveat about it, is that the price class is only working because we are using the price class selector. Now, class selectors have precedence over element selectors. So first, this P element here with the price is actually also being set to width 75% initially. And then afterwards, because it has the price class, it gets set to 75%, and it also gets set to the right side. So that's why we can get off with doing this solution, even though it's not so explicit, and it can be kind of difficult later on when you make changes to understand why things are behaving in a certain way. What I would recommend instead is to be a little more explicit, and that is by doing something like this and saying article P and then say first child. So that means we will only select the first P element inside this article parent. So that's going to be the text or the menu item name. And there we go. So now it is more explicit, and we are not doing some overriding that might be confusing later on. And yeah, that's it. That's how you do that. Now let's try and do the same thing again, where we removed the classes in Visual Studio Code. So I'm gonna paste in the code here, and then let's select this time flavor and change it out for nothing at all. And also the dessert class here. Now let's select all the code again and paste it into our code pin. And as you can see, the layout is still working fine. Now the next task for you is to see if you can remove the price class as well. So try and go ahead and pause the video and see if you can remove the price class also. Okay, so did you pause the video and try? And it's okay if you didn't come up with a solution, but at least you kind of got it thinking and tried to figure out a solution, and you're definitely going to be paying more attention once I give you the solution now. So let's see now what happens on the price styling. We have this text aligned right, which puts it to the right side, and the width we set to 25. So let's see if we could change that into a more generic selector instead. We could say something like article P, and then we select the last child instead of the first child, as we did with the menu item. We could also be more explicit and use something like, look, like this one, like inf child, and select the second child. But I like the last child one. It's a little easier to read. So let's go with that so far. Again, let's try and copy and paste the code into Visual Studio and remove the price class. And let's see if it still works. And it still looks like it's working fine. So that really cleans up our code and makes it quite simple to read, and definitely you can more easily just focus on the content. So what about, let's say, this additional class down here? Now that's an example of something where classes are really okay to use. We can see here that the additional class is these ones we have here in cursive. And let's try and see what additional actually does. We can see that it puts it to the left, which is kind of redundant. You actually don't really need to have that because we already have it defined in the element selector. So I can actually remove these parts, and actually all we simply do is to put it into an italic. So you could also call it something like a class italic instead, but let's just keep it with the additional name for now. And let's get back to the topic. As I was saying, this is a completely fine use of a class, CSS class, because we are using it sort of sparingly and only at one place. And the alternative, if you really wanted to use a more generic selector, would be to use something like article P, and then you say end child, what is it, like 7th item on the list, and then you would have the font style italic, and you would also have, for example, the 8th one. Yes, as you can see, this is like getting too much now. It's hard to read. It's hard to change, because what if I wanted to put another item on top of the items? Then suddenly I have to change the number here. It's really annoying, and also you have to have these explicit end child selectors. So that's a case of something that's too much unnecessary optimization. And so by now you have learned how to have your menu items stylized without repeating the classes all the time by using more generic selectors. What about if you have other article and P elements in your class? Well, in that case, you can use a wrapper to have around your items that you only use one time, and then you can easily not have all your other generic elements selected. So what I mean by that is, let's say I have this article, and I also am going to have P elements inside of it somewhere else on my website, and I wanted them to be styled in a different way. Let's say I have something down here, and I wanted this to not be a menu item, but to be styled in a different way. So to get around that problem, you can use a wrapper or a CSS wrapper instead. So a good place to have it in this case would be maybe just to put it up here in this section, which is the parent of all these articles up here for the menu items. So you can say something like section class and say items. And then you could be more explicit or specific in your CSS selector and say something like, we only want to select the children of the items container. So we do something like this. So now you can see this one on the top where I put the class section, the section with the class items up here is now styled correctly. And if I put it down here in the next section, here with the desserts, it's also going to be styled in this similar way. And again, we can do the same thing for the pricing here, or the menu item. We can say items. And let's see, I think there was also the one here for the price. So in that way, you can then also have these this type of structure of elements appearing other places in your site without applying the same style to it. So I hope you learned something from this, and if you have any other questions for me, please feel free to write to me and I'll be happy to answer it.